Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Stew on this podcast. And with me today is a good friend of mine, somebody that if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've heard his voice before, but for the first time ever, you're seeing his face. So Matt Mizell, welcome to the podcast, man. Or welcome back.
What's up, Stu? Yeah, this is, you said third time, but I could have sworn we've done this on video before, but maybe we've just FaceTime before. But nice to see all of your visitors, your listeners, even though I can't see them and they can see me. But it is nice to see you, Stu.
It's always good to see you, man. So in the past, man, we have talked about, what does it look like to be a family guy in ministry. We have talked about, there's an episode out there if people want to go back and check it out called Mortal Kombat. It was like all the tension that was going on, believe it or not, like 4 years ago during 2020, if you remember that time period. But you recently, I say recently, like you sent me a book almost a year ago at this point, that you wrote called Marksman. And Finally, I've had the opportunity to sit down and read it, go through it. And I marked this thing up like crazy, dude. Like you have been such an influence in my life for the longest time. And to have that wisdom and that influence written down on paper for other people to experience, dude, for me to just sit here, I bust this out within a weekend almost. I was like, man, I'm so glad that Matt wrote this. So that's what we're going to be talking about on this episode. We're going to be talking about your book, Marksman. But before we get into that, how about you just tell people who may not know who you are a little bit about yourself?
Well, yeah, thank you. Glad you bought the book. Glad you read it. There's a lot of people that buy books and don't bother to read them. So kudos to you for reading it. But yeah, my name is Matt, and I'm a lead pastor of a church in Farmington, New Mexico, which is northern New Mexico on the border of Colorado. And I've been a lead pastor for 5 years. I've got a wife named Ashton, 3 kids, Michaela and Noah and Bennett, and a dog named Max, who might make an appearance in this video. But yeah, living the dream in New Mexico and having a blast telling people about Jesus and leading guys to Jesus. So it really is a lot of fun. It's a rich and satisfying life, as Jesus says.
Yeah, dude, awesome. All right, so you wrote this book. Obviously, it's not your first book. I've gotten some other material from you before, but this one is definitely a little bit lengthier and a little bit meatier for sure. So, bro, what was the inspiration behind Marksman?
Yeah. So a marksman is a skilled and accurate shooter. And what I have discovered is that there is a lot of men in particular that are aiming for the wrong things in life. And what I mean by that is that I believe that society and culture has given the wrong definition of success to people in general. People assume that success is the big house, the multiple cars in the driveway, the number of zeros in the bank account. My bank account has 1 big zero in it. And so I'm just kidding. But I think that people have latched on to this idea of success, that it's materialistic. And that's really not what the Bible talks about. What I really believe that the Bible talks about holistically is specifically when Jesus talks about in the parable of the talents. He gives one guy, he talks about a master who goes away for a long time and entrusts his gold to 3 different types of people. And he gives his gold to one guy, says, here's 5 bags of gold. I'll return in a little while and get my bags back. And then another guy, he gives 2 bags of gold. And another guy, he gives 1 bag of gold. And the Bible says each of them was given gold according to their ability, which means they all have ability. They all have capability of investing that gold somewhere. Well, the guy who has 5 bags of gold, he invests his gold and then comes back. And when the master comes back, he says, listen, I invested your gold. You got 5 bags more. Here you go. Here's your 10. The guy who'd been given 2 bags, he says, here's your 2, but I invested it and got 2 more. Here's your 4. And the guy that had 1 bag of gold, he said, I was afraid. And so I hid your money and I buried it so I could give it back to you when you return. So here's your 1 bag of gold. And Jesus says, the master looked at the guy who had the 1 bag of gold and said, you knew that I harvested where I haven't planted seed, and you know that I'm a tough man, and yet you didn't even put this bag of gold in the bank to gain interest. And so he says, take that 1 bag of gold from this person and give it to the one who has 10 bags of gold. And he says, then throw this wicked and lazy servant outside. And so there's an implication there that Jesus is saying that if you don't use what has been entrusted to you, then you are wicked and lazy. And I know that none of your listeners want to have that description from God himself that you are wicked and lazy. And so what I really believe is that every single person, 8 something billion people or so on planet Earth, all of us have been entrusted strengths and passions. We have giftings that have been given to us. And my question is, what are you doing to utilize those strengths and passions the way that God intended you to use them? So that ties into the theme of the book of Marksman. Again, a marksman is a skilled and accurate shooter. The book teaches, again, men specifically is the target demographic for the book, but it teaches men on how to take your strengths and your passions and use those to aim at the crosshairs, which makes up your bullseye. How do you aim at the bullseye of life that God has in store for you? And basically hear what the master said in the parable of the talents. Well done, good and faithful servant. How do you do that? How do you live your life well? How do you invest what has been entrusted to you well, so that one day when you arrive at the pearly gates, whatever that looks like, God says, well done, good and faithful servant. So that's what the concept of the book is. Instead of pursuing what the world and culture says is success, of just a lot of money and a lot of stuff, I don't believe that's biblical success. True biblical success is when you've taken your strengths and your passions, invested those in things that God said is most important, and that's what your life becomes about. Whether you make a lot of money or not, whether you have a lot of stuff or not, that's irrelevant. Success is doing what God says is most important. And Jesus narrows it down. He at one point, there is a religious teacher that comes up to Jesus and says, of all the commandments, which is most important? Now, this guy is part of the Jewish culture. There's 613 commandments in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible. And so basically what this religious teacher is asking Jesus is, of 613, which is most important? And Jesus responds by saying, love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. And the second is most like it, love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, love God and love others. And I believe that's the calling for all of us in life. Love God and love others. But how we do that, how you love God and love others, Stu, is different than how I love God and love others. How you love God, you're going to love God by perhaps doing this podcast or teaching people on in VR space or whatever that looks like. Later on today, how I love God, I'm going to be doing premarital counseling on Zoom with a couple from out in California. So how you love God, how I love God, how I love others, it might be similar, but we do it in different ways. Our calling is the same based on what Jesus said. We love God and love others, but how we do that is different based on personality, based on experience, based on how God's wired me, how God's wired you. So if we can determine what my strengths are, what my passions are, and use those things to love God and love others, that's the secret to success in life. And the same thing is true for you. Same thing is true for any of your leaders. If anybody determines what their strengths are, their God-given giftings and their passions, things that they love to do, things that wake them up in the middle of the night because they're like, I'm so excited to go do this thing. If you can figure out those two things and figure out where those two things intersect, that's where they are most effective in life. And if they can use those two things, their strengths and their passions, to love God and love others, Mark Twain said, find something you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. I would modify that verse or that quote slightly and say, if you could find something that you're good at, your strength, and something that you love to do, your passion, and do those two things to love God and love others, you will never work a day in your life. And so that's what Marksman's all about, how to aim for what God said you should aim for.
So here's my question. When it comes to figuring out, I think that I would love to say, and this may not be accurate, but I think people have the ability to understand what it is that they're good at, right? You might have somebody who's a jack of all trades. You might have somebody who sits there and says, yep, I'm really good at this one or two things and super solid at it. And they can make a living off of it. They can have fun doing it. But how does a person determine that given ability, which they might not realize is a God-given ability, to a passion? Because they might be really good at what it is that they do, and they can do it for a long time and never realize that they've actually stepped into a passion. of theirs. They're just kind of riding the coattails of something that is successful, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of what the book goes into is both of those categories independently. So the book goes into how to identify your strengths. Here's your strengths, but you could be good at something that you're not passionate about. For example, administrative work, for example. I'm really good at scheduling. I'm really good at Excel documents. I'm really good at admin work, but I hate it. So in my role as a lead pastor, I have multiple people that work for me that do my admin type of work, because even while I could do it and I'm good at it, I don't prefer to do it. I don't want to do it. So I have strengths that are not my passions. Well, that's not my sweet spot in life. I might be good at doing something, but if I don't love to do it, let somebody else who does love to do it. I can think of several people on staff that love admin. I'm like, God bless you. I'm so thankful that you love doing that, because that is not my love. Yet on the flip side of that coin, there's many passions that I have that are not my giftings. I'll give you an example. I remember back when I was going to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque years ago. I really, you know this, but your listeners might not, Stu, but I used to be a DJ in a former lifetime, feels like. So a long time ago, I used to be a DJ, and I spin records and all that for other people's events and weddings and whatever, clubs and all that. But I was always playing other people's music. And so I was like, man, it'd be cool. Like, cause I have a passion for music. It'd be cool to make my own music, to, play my own music. And so I went out and bought like this nice guitar. I don't remember the brand, Fender or something like that, but I bought this nice acoustic guitar and tried to just, I brought it home and strummed it. In fact, Stu, you might have even played my guitar at some point, because it was in my house over on the west side of Albuquerque. I know you've been to that house before. Anyway, so I got this really nice guitar, but I didn't know how to play it. And so at the time, YouTube wasn't even a thing. And so I took some classes over by UNM, and this guy was trying to teach me how to play it. And it's just not my gifting. Like, I envy the people that are good at guitar. I'm not that guy. So I have a passion for music, but it's not my gifting. It's not my strength. And so it's possible to have strengths that are not your passions. It's possible to have passions that are not your strengths. And that's okay. That's all of us. We all have things that we love that we're not good at. We have things that we're good at that we don't love. But the secret to success in that way that I unpack in Marksman is find the things that overlap. If you can find a strength that you also love, or find something that you love and get good at it so it becomes a strength. I think Macklemore has a song, 10,000 Hours. And he talked about in the song, if you just invest 10,000 hours, and his song's not new to it, the lyrics aren't new to it. It's just this, you can become a pro if you invest 10,000 hours in whatever it is that you do. Whether that's the magical number or not, I don't know. But what I do know is that you can be passionate about something and invest time and time and time and time, and eventually get really good at it where it becomes a strength. And so it's possible. It's possible to start off with a passion that becomes a strength. It's possible to have a strength that becomes a passion. That for me is pastoring. I was not always, I would say I wasn't always a good pastor. And I would say I for sure was not always passionate about pastoring. And I feel just in the last, I've been pastoring vocationally for about 15 years or so, 16 years or so. And I would say only in the last handful of years or so do I feel like I've gotten better at it. I by no means arrived. But I feel like I've gotten a lot better at pastoring as far as the strength side. But man, Stu, I'm having a blast as a pastor in ways that I never dreamed that I would. And I never saw that coming. Rewind 16 years ago when I first started as a youth pastor in Albuquerque, it certainly was not a passion. In fact, I remember telling God, you made a mistake calling me into ministry, God, because this isn't my thing. Like I thought I was going to be building businesses. I thought I might even go to law school. But I never dreamed I would love being a pastor as much as I am today. So my point being that sometimes your strengths grow in the passion area. Sometimes your passion grow in the strength area. But if you can find a strength that's also your passion and where they overlap, and something that you're good at, something that you love to do. And then the missing link really, Stu, is not even that for most people, because most people are like, oh, I love motorcycles and I'm passionate about motorcycles. Well, that's great. Some people where I live in Farmington, they work in the oil and gas field because there's a lot of oil and gas, jobs in the industry around here. And a lot of people, they enjoy their job, but the missing component for most people that I've discovered is that there's almost zero intentionality of taking their bullseye, the intersection of their strengths and their passions. There's almost zero intentionality of loving God and loving others. And that's the missing connection for most people. They're aiming at the target of, I want to make money. I make a lot of, especially oil and gas. You can make a lot of money in that industry, but call it whatever, law or medicine or whatever, sales. A lot of people, they're attracted to a job because of the benefits or the paycheck or the scalability, but they're not thinking at all about how do I love God and love others. So part of what Marksman really challenges people to do is really think kind of like Truett Cathy, who's the founder of Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A's model, a lot of people aren't aware, but Chick-fil-A's model, or their mission rather, has nothing to do with chicken. The mission of Chick-fil-A is to glorify God and be a blessing to the community. And that may not be exactly what the wording is of their mission, but it has nothing to do with about chicken. And what Chick-fil-A does is they use chicken as their excuse to love the community. And I love that. And I really believe that I think that that's how all of us should look at whatever our career is, whatever it is, whether you're a blacksmith or you're a janitor, or whether you're a teacher, or whether you're whatever, an engineer, whatever it is, you have to use that career for what Jesus said is most important in life, which is to love God and love others. So if you just use your career to make a paycheck, what credit is that to you? What we should be doing is saying, okay, if this is my chicken sandwich, so to speak, from Chick-fil-A, if this is the tool, this isn't the end all. This can't be the end all. This is just a means to an end. The end is loving God and loving others. But how do I use this to get to that? And that's the disconnect that most people I've recognized see. I'll give you an example. There's a guy named Matthew Emmons. Matthew Emmons was the #1 sharpshooter in the world, #1 marksman in the world. And at the age of 24, he went to the 2004 Athens Olympics. And he was one shot away from getting a gold medal. And all he had to do, he was so far ahead of all of the competitors, all he had to do was hit the target somewhere. And all he had to do was hit the target and he'd get a gold medal. So he lined up his rifle, pointed it at the target, takes a shot, bullseye right in the middle of the target, but he doesn't medal. Do you know why, Stu? Do you remember the story from the book?
I do remember, but don't let me ruin it. Go for it, bud.
Reason why he didn't get the medal is because he hit the wrong target.
Yeah.
And I think there's a possibility that someday in heaven, there's a possibility that when we're standing outside the pearly gates, Jesus may say something along the lines of, what did you do that I've entrusted to you? What did you do with what I entrusted to you? And I think that many people will say, well, did I not prophesy in your name? Did I not teach in your name? Did I not do this and this and this and this and this? Did I not do all these different things with what you gave me? But really, it wasn't to love God and love others. They just collected a paycheck, or they just went after this dream, or they made all this money so they could buy all these toys or whatever. And I think there's a possibility that many people miss the entire point of life. Jesus clarified the two greatest commands: love God and love others. So whatever you use, with whatever you do, whether in word or deed, whatever, do it all to love God and love others. And that's the big disconnect, even with Christians. I think there's a lot of people that they compartmentalize their faith. Faith is, I go to church on Sunday, or I watch online in a VR environment or whatever, but I participate in a church environment or culture or whatever on Sunday. And then Monday through Friday is my day job, and I compartmentalize those things. I separate them. So there's no faith. I don't talk about God. I don't look at ways to love God and love others in my job. That's reserved for Sunday. And I think that's perhaps why we see such a degradation in Christianity throughout the United States right now. Christianity is plumbing. It's not growing. It's declining. Why? Because I think so many people are really not authentic in their faith, meaning that they're not a Christian through and through. They're a Sunday Christian. They do the right thing on Sunday, but Jesus doesn't permeate their entire life. He doesn't change their marriage. He doesn't change their parenting. He doesn't change the way that they look at their job. If their job is just a job, they're missing the point. If the chicken sandwich is just the chicken sandwich, they're missing the point. Their job, their career should be a tool to use to say, how can I use this job to love God and love others? And that, for me, is really a part of the exciting discussion that I get to have with dozens, if not hundreds of men throughout the course of the year, really sitting down and saying, okay, here's your job. For one, is it your passion? Because there's a lot of guys that do something they're good at, but they don't love it. It's just, I just go to work. It's my 9 to 5. And it just gets me a paycheck. Man, what would it be like if you loved it? If you're good at it and you loved it. And oh, by the way, icing on the cake is that you got paid for it. What would that be like? And some guys will be in a job. It'll pay them a decent wage. So then at least they can go and volunteer and give away time doing something that they love to do. But if we go through life where it's just boring and mundane and there's no excitement, then I really think that's contradictory to what Jesus said he came for. In John 10:10, he said, I have come that they may have a rich and satisfying life. And I think a lot of people have settled. I think a lot of people, Christians and not, I think they settle for a boring, mundane, routine life. And there's no adventure. And it's not a rich and satisfying life. And I think God has created us to live a rich life of abundance. And I'm not just talking about finances. I'm talking about just the satisfaction level of life. And I think a lot of people miss out on that because they're not doing what they're made to do. They're not living what they're called to do. And whatever they're doing, they're not doing what Jesus said is most important in life. They go to church, they worship, they sing a couple songs, they learn a few things from a pastor, but they're not using what God has entrusted to them to build the kingdom of God. And if they shifted their why, I go to work to love God and love others. I might still do the same exact job, but now I'm here for a different reason. If they can shift that perspective, every conversation is different. Every interaction with a client, with a customer, with a coworker, with a boss, with a subordinate, everything changes because now my why is different. This whole job is just to love God and love others. Everything else is details. So the only reason I'm here is not to make a widget, not to make a sale, not to do this. The only reasons I'm here is to love God and love others. So if this is my tool on how to do that, then awesome. Thank you, God, for the tool. But the tool in itself is not the end all. This is just a means to the end. The means to the end is to do what Jesus said is most important in life, love God and love others. That's a long answer to your question.
That's all good.
My wife is over here laughing at me right now.
Of course she is. And she's amazing. And she should be laughing at you. Now, here's a great question, because obviously, like, target audience for this is Christian male, right? Yeah. So, somebody who listens to this, or let's just talk about just a person in general. They are living into their strength and they're living into their passion. But from a non-Christian point of view, let me ask you it this way. Burnout is a real thing, right? We saw a lot of it within the past 4 years, especially within 2020 and the years running after it. But do you believe that burnout comes from people either, one, not living into strengths and passions, and not living in, or living into strengths and passions, but not for the intention that God designed you for? Like, does that make sense? Like, you're over here trying to do things out of your own strength. You're trying to do it out of a passion. And you're not really capable of doing it. And you're just kind of like, oh man, this sucks. I keep moving from one job to another, or one passion to another, because things aren't lining up. On the other side of the spectrum, though, is it possible that you have somebody who's like, dude, I'm really good at what I do. I really love what I do, but I'm not finding that fulfillment.
Yeah, I think burnout is a result of possibly both of those things, plus maybe even a little bit more. But burnout for sure, if you're doing something you're good at but that you don't love, or something that you love that you're not good at, either way, there's burnout on the horizon. So if you're doing something, again, maybe for the paycheck, but I just don't like doing this, you're going to burn out quick. And again, yeah, you're right about the demographic. It's supposed to be intended for Christian males. It's not really intended for evangelism, but really to capture. The book is entitled or intended to really come alongside Christian men and help them understand what God's calling for your life is. But if you're doing something that you are gifted in that you don't like, it's just a matter of time before you wave the white flag. And, if you were to Google Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs is not a Christian, but he has a lot of videos online on YouTube where he talks specifically about you must have a passion for what you do. Because if you don't, every job gets hard. every single job has its hard moments. And if you don't love what you do, you're going to tap out. You're going to be done. Because why continue doing what you hate? It doesn't make any sense that you would keep doing something that you don't enjoy doing. So when it gets tough, yeah, I should quit. And the people that quit something that they hate, good. I applaud them. You should quit, because that's one step closer to the thing, getting to do the thing that you love to do. Even when people get fired, when somebody gets fired and let go from a job, if they didn't love doing what they were doing, sometimes there's a kind of a freak out of, I'm being let go, so where's my paycheck come from? But I had a conversation just a few weeks ago with a guy who got let go from his position, and he's super bummed, and he's talking with his wife and his kids about the situation. It's scary because of the unknown, but at the same time, I was like, bro, I know this is going to be hard for you to hear, but I'm really excited for you. I'm excited because I also know he has this passion and this dream of launching a business that he's never launched because he's been working a 9 to 5. So the 9 to 5 has kept him from his dream, but his dream or his job just got revoked from him. So now you got all this free time to just pursue the thing that you feel like you wanted to do anyways. And Stu, there's so many stories like that of guys that are like, well, I got fired from my job, but it freed me up to do what I feel like I was born to do. And now I'm doing it. And I'm so glad I got fired. And so that's a frequent story. And so a lot of people, they're in their strengths. They're not doing something they're passionate about. Well, get out of that as quick as you can and find something that you're able to love doing what you're doing. And kind of like what I said earlier, you, by the way, also get paid for it. Bob Goff is an example of that. Bob Goff is a well-known author out of San Diego, and he was a really successful lawyer. And he knew, even though he was successful as a lawyer, he was an ethical lawyer, Christian lawyer. He also knew that he felt like there was more that God had in store for him. So in his book, Love Does, that he wrote years ago, he talked about how he made enough money as a lawyer to be able to take trips over to, I think it was Uganda. And he would go over to Uganda where he would invest in the youth out there. And eventually he was able to start an orphanage out in Uganda. Well, that was his passion. He would do his law work back in San Diego, but I'm good at it, but I don't love it as much as I love helping youth in a third world country. So he kept saving money, going out there, started another orphanage and then another orphanage, to the point where he started hundreds of orphanages. And eventually the book sales from Love Does made so much money that he was able to quit his 9 to 5. Even though he was good at it, he stopped being a lawyer to do full time what he was most passionate about. And that's still what Bob Goff does today. He still authors books, but he helps youth in other countries. He's just adding on more and more things that he loves to do. Well, same thing. Like you're eventually, if you don't love what you're doing, you're going to find a reason to not do it. And to that, I would say, good. I'm glad you burned out. I'm glad you got fired. I'm glad that job got revoked from you, because I'd rather you invest your time, which is a limited resource, in something that fires you up. And if you get paid for it, great. If you don't get paid for it at first, that's fine. Because eventually there's a niche for everything. Eventually you'll get paid for something that you love to do and that you're good at. So going back to your question, is it possible for somebody to get burned out doing something that they're good at? Absolutely. Same thing. If they're passionate, but it's not their strength, it's easy to get burned out too, because you might try something like me playing guitar. I'm trying, and I'm just not good at it. I'm not getting better at it. And so at some point you just got to cut your losses and be like, okay, this isn't my strength. I've tried. There's other things that I'm gifted in. And rather than beat the dead horse, I just need to go and do stuff that I'm good at instead of trying to convince myself I'm good at something I'm not. So burnout is on both of those sides. Now, where I was saying it may even be more complicated than that is, what if you're doing something that you're both good at and you love, where you're doing what I'm challenging people to do, and you're loving God and loving others? It's still possible to burn out. For me, I need downtime scattered throughout the year, not even scattered just throughout the year, scattered throughout the week. I'm in front of people all week long. And then on Sunday, we have hundreds, if not thousands of people that come to the church, and there's people that are wanting prayer and wanting me to pour into them. And it's an honor. It's a blessing, but there's only so much of me to pour out. And so I need, like on Monday, for example, Monday is my writing day. It's my day where I write my sermons, but I don't take any meetings. I don't do podcasts. I don't have staff meetings. I don't do anything with people on Monday, because that's my me time. And actually Mondays used to be filled with meetings where I was giving my best time to other people on staff. And actually I listened to a podcast from Kerry Newhoff a while ago, and he was like, reserve the best time for your most important work. And I switched my whole weekly schedule around, and I was like, my best time is Monday because I just come off the high of Sunday. I'm excited, I'm amped, but I also need a break from people. And so I tuck myself away in the house. I don't even go to the church where people can't see me. They can't knock on my door, and I block myself away, and that's my writing time. And I don't even answer phone calls on Monday for the most part. So if I hold on. If I don't have little pockets of me time, I'll get burned out. There was a long time that I went about 9 months when I didn't have an executive pastor, and what I just told you I couldn't do. I had to.
Mm-hmm.
I had 18 meetings on Mondays, meeting after meeting after meeting of department heads throughout the church, and I was like, I'm just treading water. I am doing what I love to do. I'm doing what I'm getting better at doing, but gosh, I'm about to lose it. And so for 9 months, I was just piling up, just being depleted and depleted and depleted. And finally, I hired an executive pastor, and he took a lot of that weight off my shoulders, where it allows me to do what I'm best at, and it allows him to manage most of the staff. So through the course of the week, Monday is a downtime. Friday is my Sabbath. That's my I date my wife and I date God basically day, where I don't do housework. I don't take meetings on Fridays. Oftentimes, Ashton and I, my wife and I, will go on a morning date. Our evening dates are hard because we got 3 kids, but we'll go on a morning date. So we got some hot springs up in Colorado. Sometimes we'll go up to the hot springs. So I protect that time and I guard that time. Now, sometimes there's ebb and flows. A Good Friday before Easter, we have Good Friday services, and so Good Friday is really busy. Sometimes I'll be out of town for a conference or a retreat or whatever, so it's not 100% of the time. But my point being, I need to carve out time where there's rest built in. I love John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, where it talks about the necessity of creating margin and rest as a part of your ongoing schedule. I think that's really important for people in church, but even for people that don't work in a church. And then annual rest too. And so I take 3 weeks off at a time in the month of July. Every July, I take 3 weeks off, where my team they run everything. Other people are preaching, other people are doing other stuff, but I take that time off to fill back up. And by the time I come back to church, I'm like, I miss church. I miss the people in church. But if I don't do that, I begin to resent the people in church. I begin to resent the staff in church. So oftentimes I'm so exhausted and depleted by the time I get to July 1st, I feel like I'm crawling to the finish line. Like I need a break. And then I get filled back up and just disconnection time, where I'm not on my phone. I'm not answering emails. I have an autoresponder to my emails saying, I'm out of the office. If you need something, contact this dude. So that weekly time, that Sabbath on Friday, really important. Monday to fill me back up, important. Time throughout the year, that's all important. Now, all that being said, the asterisk on that is that I just listened to a podcast from Craig Rochelle the other day, and he said, some people need downtime. He's like, not me. When I'm on vacation, I need 2 hours to do work in the morning. And I'm like, that's the contradictory to what I preach and I believe, but everybody's different. And so I would never give that advice to somebody of, hey, work when you're supposed to be with your wife and your kids on a vacation, you should work. I would never give that advice. But Craig Rochelle knows himself that he feels guilty, where he's like, he's convinced, he's talked to his wife and she's okay with him, going to the gym in the morning and putting in 2 hours of work, where he feels like he's accomplished something, where it allows him to feel like a mental release for the rest of the day, where he can relax at that point. So there's nothing wrong with that for Craig Rochelle. For me, that would not work. What I do wouldn't work for Craig Rochelle. Point being that it is possible in a variety of different situations to get burned out, and you just have to learn what the seasons are, what works for you to get refilled. But if you're not doing your strengths and your passions, I think that you are likely headed for burnout. And again, to my point earlier, I'm glad that you are, because I would rather somebody burn out from something that they hate doing, so it frees up the time so they could do what God's created them, designed them to do instead.
Yeah. And you mentioned it in your book too. You talk about all the different jobs that you had and how each one just kind of led you to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And it's just kind of like a refining process to all of a sudden you get to that point. You're like, well, I liked a little bit of that, or, hey, I was actually really good at this. And it gets you to that point of really dialing in, if you will, of hitting that bullseye as a marksman. So, Matt, what I know from reading the book is that this is not a this is not a material just to consume. It's not content just to consume, but there's actually more to it. Like there's activities, there's homework assignments attached to it. So I think at this point, anybody who's listening to this understands, hey, Matt's heartbeat behind this book is let's get people to that sweet spot, that marksmanship, hitting that bullseye between strengths and passions. However, I would venture to guess that there is more to it than just that, and you want more for people than just reading this book. So, what else is there to this?
Yeah, so two parts to that answer. One is that as a communicator, as a pastor, one of my pet peeves is when people come to church on a Sunday, they'll listen to a sermon, and then they'll come up afterwards, oftentimes, and hey, good job, good sermon, pastor, and then they walk out the door, and it's really in one ear, out the other. But in the book of James, brother Jesus, he says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." And so every sermon that I preach is always, okay, here's what God's word says, but here's an application of something you can do with what you just heard. Because I don't want you to just add to your knowledge. I want you to take action. And action is where life change takes place. So you're right. It's not just the book that I want people to take action with. It's every time that I'm in front of an audience with a microphone, I want whatever it is that I'm communicating to lead to them taking a step of action of some sort for their life to get better on their own. So the same is true for the Marksman book. I want people to not just read the book and add to their knowledge and be like, "Well, good content. That was great. Thanks, Matt." I want them to do something with it. And so there's lots of suggestions throughout the book where people can take action. There's an actual 6-week boot camp, what I call a boot camp, where guys can actually go through an interactive course with other men. Guys go through it online. They go through it in person. We've had people from coast to coast, from New York City to San Diego, taking the course. And so you can basically go jump into a course at different times throughout the year where you're unpacking this book, because let's be honest, Stu, there's not a whole lot of men that are really good at reading books. You read the book, kudos to you. Most men are not good at reading books. And so while most guys could do what you just did, I also know that 95% of men won't. And so the course teaches guys what they could read in the book, but it's an experiential type of journey where they're taking that journey with other men. And I've had hundreds of men go through Marksman, the boot camp, where they go with pockets of guys, and the guys that they go through a Marksman boot camp with become their brothers. There's just countless stories that I have of men who have gotten to know each other, and these guys are like, they do life with each other and they bleed for each other. And again, this is just where men are deficient in general, Stu. I mean, women are really social in general. I know this is a general stereotype, but women are really good at connecting socially. Men are typically really deficient in that. And most guys that are probably even listening to this podcast right now, if I were to tell you, hey, tell me your top 3 friends, most guys couldn't come up with a single name, because most men are really bad at connecting with other men. So what the Marksman Boot Camp does is it really helps guys connect with other like-minded men who want to better themselves, want to become a man after God's own heart. And they go through this journey with each other. And the guys that graduate with each other, it's a beautiful thing. I feel almost like a matchmaker where I get to put on these boot camps, but I see these guys meeting each other, and then I step away and these guys remain friends. And it's awesome because there's hundreds of them. And so it's really cool. And then one step further than that is that we do these Marksman Zion trips out in Zion National Park in southern Utah, where guys that go through the whole boot camp can then take the next step in their own journey if they want. And I take these guys out there, and I personally, right now, I lead all of them, but I lead these trips out to Zion. And I don't know if any of your listeners have been to Zion before, but Zion is it's like my Disneyland. It is some of the best of God's creation in the world, in my opinion. And there's some really, really cool things to do and see in Zion. In fact, 2 of the top 10 hikes in the world are located in the same national park, in Zion National Park. And one's called Angel's Landing and the other one's called the Narrows. And I take guys on both of these hikes, on 2 of the top 10 hikes in the world. And they're two of the top 10 hikes in the world for a reason. They're majestic, they're beautiful, they're breathtaking, and they're unforgettable. And what I love about these trips is that because they're unforgettable, and I know that sounds kind of cliche that it's an unforgettable hike, but it really is unforgettable. I mean, I remember the first time I stood on the top of Angel's Landing. I remember the first time I came down the Narrows. The Narrows is the longest slot canyon in the world with the Virgin River carving through it. It's like kind of like a Grand Canyon that's vertical. The walls go 2,000 feet up and the river runs through the middle of it. Angel's Landing is like hiking the inverse of that, where you hike this really narrow trail with 1,500-foot drop-offs on both sides to the very top, where you have a 3D view or a 360 view from the middle of this canyon, of the Zion Canyon, but just breathtaking views. But again, what I love to do with men is take these guys on these trips where if it's an unforgettable view, while they're experiencing that unforgettable view, I'll teach them a short lesson of God's word. Because while their body is releasing oxytocin and adrenaline and it's burning in this beautiful, incredible, unforgettable view into their memory, if I can trickle God's word into their mind while they're experiencing this beautiful view, they'll never forget the biblical lesson attached to the view. So unforgettable, timeless truths from God's word combined with unforgettable views, and you have an infusion that takes place in guys' minds, well, they're never going to forget it. So, Stu, here's the fascinating thing psychologically. I was a public speaker for, 10 years before I became a pastor. And I've done a lot of public speaking training. And what's fascinating to me is that I can give a sermon on a Sunday, and by Monday, I could ask my staff, what did I preach on yesterday? And a lot of them would be like, I remember a verse, like 99.9% of what I taught by Monday is gone. You ask them 3 weeks later, hey, what was the name of the series that I preached before Easter? Just tell me the name of the series. They don't remember. So I've struggled with that for a long time. I invest a lot of time writing content. I invest a lot of time writing sermons, and then they can't even remember the title of the sermon series, much less what was the point of the series. So I've struggled with that. Now, that being said, I've taken, 100, 200 guys to Zion, and I frequently test these guys kind of off the record, like, hey, what's the lesson on the top of Angel's Landing? And guys, remember, they could teach the lesson. And so there's proof in the pudding, so to speak, that when you can teach something in an unforgettable environment, it has a sticky factor. I don't know the demographics of the listeners on this podcast, but for people that were around for 9/11 and remember it, they can remember exactly where they were when the planes hit the Twin Towers. I remember exactly where I was when Saddam Hussein was killed. I remember where I was when the Oklahoma City bombing. That's before your time, Stu, but the Oklahoma City bombing took place in 1996. I remember where I was in these big milestone moments. And the reason why is because the body has a natural response of adrenaline, oxytocin. On the negative side of it, it's why people can oftentimes why they're drawn to pornography, for example. When they see something that creates a burning effect in their mind, it sticks in their mind. And for a long time, I struggled with pornography. I could tell you what I looked at in the 7th grade when I saw a Playboy for the first time. There's a burning effect that takes place. So it can be used for good or for bad. So if we could take what has been really perverted and really utilized for bad with pornography, with that industry, what's really taken out of context for what God intended for oxytocin and adrenaline and all that, if you can restore that and say, okay, we're going to use that natural body response for good rather than bad. I really love the idea of that, and that's what God does. He takes bad situations and makes good, and he works for the good of those who love him in all things. And so anyway, so all that being said, going back to what you were talking about, Marksman, you can read the book, but yeah, you could take it further if you want. You could take a boot camp. You can go through this journey with other guys. You could do that, but if you want, you could take that to the next level. You can go to Zion. You can have this unforgettable experience where you're teaching or you're learning these concepts, but you're also infusing them into your mind. And if you can infuse them into your mind for decades, you'll be able to remember the concepts that Marksman really has equipped you with. And really, big picture, Marksman's all about literally changing the world. And Marksman is changing the world on a micro level, but for our 20th Stu on this episode, or I think we're on 3 right now, for number 20 down the road, our conversations are going to be different because Marksman's changing the world, man after man, family after family. And I have a 20-year plan for Marksman as far as how we're going to reach the ends of the earth. And we're going to. I believe we're on track right now for the vision for what that looks like and the statistics for what that looks like. And in 20 years from now, we're going to, Jesus says, go to all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, the Great Commission. And there's some people that take that kind of metaphorically, like, oh, that's cool. That's kind of cool. Like, let's make an impact. Or you can say, let's go to all nations, like for real. Let's literally change the world. And again, going back to Steve Jobs, he said, I think something along the lines of, it's the ones who think that they're crazy enough to change the world that do. And perhaps I'm crazy enough to think that I can change the world with the message of Jesus Christ and the gospel, but we're going to change the world. And Marksman is just a tool. It's not about the brand. It's not about the name of Marksman. It's just a tool for men to step up and be the man God's called them to be. And when we reach the men, they, by leadership, the head of the household, they reach the women, they reach the children. So we're reaching entire communities by going after men, calling them to be what God's called them to be. So right now, Stu, this episode comes at a kind of a cool time for me because we've had Marksman in our church at Hills Church in Farmington we really launched in 2020. So this is year 4 for us, heading into year 4. But in the next few weeks, we have 4 new churches that are launching Marksman as their men's ministry. So we have one out in San Diego, one in Cruces, a couple more in town. So it's cool that other churches and other pastors are seeing the value in saying, I don't have to recreate the wheel. I'm going to take this whole concept, drop it into my church, and guys in my church will now start having, the benefit. And basically it's a whole men's ministry pre-packaged, ready to go, where it could just be a book. You could just read the book, or you could take a whole lot further for if you're a pastor, if you're of church, if you're over men's ministry, an associate pastor, whatever, you can take this whole concept, drop it into your church. And we've had, just in the last year, we've had 46% growth in our church. And a lot of that, I believe, is men stepping up, doing what they're called to do. And it has completely changed the DNA of the church. And it's beautiful to watch. It's really cool. I mean, someday if you come visit Hills Church, Stu, just come in and be a fly on the wall and watch the men in the room before and after church, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The men, they're hugging their brothers. It's not just coming in, holding the hands with their wife and sitting down and standing up to sing songs and then listening to the sermon and then leaving. It's a brotherhood that has permeated every part of the church. So it's awesome. It's really cool to see the fruit of what God is doing by men realizing God has called me for something bigger than what I dreamed. And many of these guys, guys have quit careers. Guys have Marksman tattoos. Guys have Marksman on the back of their trucks. Like there's a lot of guys that have been significantly impacted by the concepts that are in the book, but it's all the gospel. It's what Jesus talks about. So if some of your listeners go onto Amazon, they can buy Marksman off of Amazon. But really, it's a way of packaging what Jesus said is most important. Love God, love others. Here's how you do that in a practical way.
Dude, absolutely amazing. Let me ask you this one quick question. I'm going to challenge you to answer it as quickly as you possibly can. What percentage of men at Hills has gone through Marksman? Let's say at least read the material, gone through the boot camp.
I would say 50%.
Okay. Yeah. Dude, that's awesome. So cool. All right. Well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for writing the book. Second of all, let me say thank you for thinking I'm younger than I am, because I do remember the Oklahoma City bombing. But
well, that's good for you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Super, super thankful for that. But this is, I'll give you this moment. Like, if there was any reason, maybe even past some of the stuff that we've already talked about, if there was any reason that somebody were to hop over to Amazon right now, so you're talking to guys, you're talking to wives, you're talking to maybe even kids, because you share some great stories about even like your own upbringing, what's gone on with your family and whatnot too. If you were to give like that 30,000 foot perspective as to like the why somebody either needs to buy this for themselves or for their husband or dad or whatever, what would you say?
I think a lot of men internally deep down know that they're made for something more, and they just don't know what that is. So if if anybody, if you're a wife of somebody and you know that your husband, he's just going through the motions, he's just living life, but he's missing something in life. If you're a guy that's listening and you're like, man, I know I have a greater calling, I just don't know what that is, then this book of Marksman is for you. I want to help equip you, train you, and prepare you to discover what God has created you and designed you to do. And I want to give you some challenges to make that come to fruition. And if you feel there's more to life than what I'm experiencing, then I agree with your discernment, and Marksman will help you aim for what God wants you to aim for.
So good. Well, I got the book. I recommend it. Thank you for that gift. I will be going through a boot camp here within the next year or so, and I will be going with you to Zion here in 2025. So I'm looking forward to all of that. And for any of you who are listening, I want to challenge you, get that book either for yourself, for your husband, for your dad. And hopefully I will be seeing you as part of the boot camp as well in the next year, and maybe even going with me and Matt to Zion. So looking forward to it. And again, Matt, thank you for twisting my wife's arm to get me that trip in
You're
a year.
welcome.
So,
well, shout out to Melissa for helping
that's
you
right.
get but she didn't buy you the book. I sent you the book a while back because you're supposed to be a part of some other boot camp and it didn't work out with the timing or whatever. But now that you got the book, now you can come through the boot camp. So
It's all in God's timing anyways.
yeah, it'll be
So
cool. All right,
how
bro.
do
Well,
people get in touch with you?
You can go to Matt at mattmizell.com, MATT at MATTMIZELL.com. And or you can type my name into Amazon too. You mentioned other books. There's a bunch of other books on there people can buy. But yeah, Marksman. You'll notice, hold up that book again, Stu. You'll notice that my name is not at the bottom of it because it's not about me. It's about you. So my hope is that if you choose to get that book, that you would become a marksman. That's my hope for you when you read that you would become a marksman. By the end of the book, you'll be trained and prepared and equipped to be a skilled and accurate shooter, aiming for what God has in store for you. And so I'd love to take that journey with you. My contact information is in that book as well, so you can reach out from there if you do want to get in the book.
Perfect. All those contact information, ways to get a hold of Matt will be in the show notes. So you can always go to the bottom, click on that, and start ordering your copy of Marksman today. So, buddy, thank you so much for hopping on to the podcast once again. I always love it when you and I get to hang out. Even in distance, there's a way for you and I to be close, and I appreciate it. So thanks for being on. If you all would do me the favor of sharing, subscribing, rating, reviewing, that helps a lot. And I will see you next time on another episode of the Stu on This podcast. Be blessed.
See ya.